Alright, so I bought the OVERDRIVER 8s, and I want to go over a few things. So this video I'm going to talk about what mechs it works well with, what implants it works well with, and how it generally compares to the likes of the other two bullet spray weapons being minigun and Viper. Alright, so we got a 3v3 here. It's pretty cool. First off, okay, well, first and foremost, you might notice the right side doesn't have the ammo thing. It, like, on the reticle there. Like, right there in the middle. Yeah, that's just a visual bug. Don't worry about it. It doesn't actually change the gameplay or anything. I don't know why that happens, but it's always missing on the right side for some reason. Classic mech arena, right? But in terms of like what kinds of mechs it works well with, it's really the same types of mechs as you'd use with OVERDRIVER or Viper, right? Any type of like brawler mech that's too slow to be using with Revoker. That's really all it is, right? Like bullet spray weapons that specialize in mid-range DPS. You're really only using them, you're going to be using them on anything that can't really be using Revoker very effectively. Revoker's clearly the best weapon for the job, but if it's too slow, if your mech's too slow, and you can't make good use out of that, then, you know, obviously you need something with a bit more range, and that is where these types of weapons come in. So that's nice. Aegis is going to be a classic example. Aegis is a really good one. Sentinel is a decent one as well. Bro just fell off the map. Yeah, bye. Yeah, so, you know, most tanks, honestly, like, in terms of that, like, basically every tank is going to do pretty well with a sustained fire weapon like that. That guy, I don't want his shield to explode and kill me. Would not be great. And then, in terms of, like, how it performs compared to, like, Viper, I'd say it's just straight up better. Okay, yeah, I did die to that shield. I figured I would. Alright, so I just finished that battle, and literally this event comes up. I don't even know what this is. I literally just bought this one. I'm so freaking mad. If this would have been a better option. I don't think it would have been, because this is a credit-based item, and it's going to ask you to spend A coins to buy, which is probably not a good idea. But let me log into a different account real quick and just check to see what this thing's all about. Okay, so here we are on a different account. Yeah, so it's looking like 5% chance, 15 total. You might get in like 8 or 9 spins on average. Even still, like any amount of A coins spent on a weapon that you could have just bought with credits, I feel like you may as well just buy it with credits. I wouldn't even bother with the A coin. Even if it's technically cheaper. It's 3,000 A coins to guarantee it. You could probably get it by spending like less than 2,000 A coins. But at the same time, it's a credit-based weapon. So like, should you do it? I don't know. I'll leave this up to you guys. You can do whatever you want with it. Take a screenshot of this. So yeah, decent event, but I mean, I wouldn't have spun it on this account anyway, so I don't really care. Also worth mentioning, after that battle, there's also a ability cooldown modifier, so the mech cooldowns are going to be a lot shorter from the rest of this video. 2v2, very interesting. I have it on Sentinel now. So I already talked about how it compares to Viper. I think that it's just straight up better. I do not think that there is a single mech that I would ever say, yeah, that works better with Viper than it does with OVERDRIVER. No, I think OVERDRIVER is better on everything, and Viper is just straight up inferior. It's not that much worse, and it's still good, especially at this SP, but I think that OVERDRIVER is just going to be overall superior. So yeah, if you don't have either of them and you're wondering which one to get, definitely go with OVERDRIVER. If you already have Viper, though, I mean, I'll be honest, like, is it that much better? No, it's not a whole lot better, especially at this SP, right? Between like Viper 8 and OVERDRIVER 8, it's going to be a pretty similar, you're going to get pretty similar results with them. So, if you already have the Viper, you could skip OVERDRIVER realistically. It's not going to be that much better. It'll be a little bit better, but it's not really worth nearly 1,000,000 credits, right? I would say that it's a slightly, on the flip side, it's kind of the same thing with Minigun, except with OVERDRIVER being slightly worse. So I think Minigun is a slightly better version of OVERDRIVER. They work very similarly, and you'd use them on the same mechs for the most part. There are a couple mechs that I would say work better with OVERDRIVER than they do with Minigun. Because each weapon has a little bit of pros and cons, right? Minigun's got better sustained damage. You can hold the fire button for a lot longer. OVERDRIVER, you see when it's burning out, I have to make sure that it, you know, unless I want it to burn out fully and wait for it to reload, which I don't want to do, I have to make sure that I'm I'm careful and I'm giving it a pause, right? I have to give the trigger a break every once in a while to make sure I don't overheat the weapon. And that's just not great for when you want to get as much damage out as possible, right? So minigun's a little bit better in that regard. But the benefit of OVERDRIVER is that it has much, much, much better effective range. The accuracy is pretty darn good. 110 meters max range, and pretty little damage fall off at that range. There's almost zero spread. I think there's a little bit of spread, but you can easily hit targets at 110 meters range. The main problem is that the projectile speed's kind of low, so I wouldn't recommend using it at range, but it is, you know, better effective DPS at like, you know, 60, even like 80 meters than, let's say, minigun, right? Yeah, this is kind of a problem. I did not mean to burn out my left or my right side. I gotta kind of stagger these a little bit. No, I burnt out the left side. That's annoying. But they're both, oh, that's a kill shot. That's a kill shot. No, sir. No thanks. Yeah. So you have to try to, like, you can see even at like 70-ish meters, which is what I was at there. I have to try to lead my target a bit because the projectile speed is pretty low. And that's not good because especially fast mechs, they can just change their trajectory really quickly, and it's nearly impossible to hold damage at them from any reasonable range with OVERDRIVER. So really it's only going to work against, the accuracy is really only effective against like slower mechs like that Zephyr. We need that middle beacon pretty soon, but for now, I can chill. And that's part of the reason that I didn't buy the 10s to replace Graviton, for example, even though I would say, oh, hi. Well, that's not good. Yeah, I'm cooked. All right, then. Fair enough. No, he got the drop on me. I respect it. So, like, you might be wondering why I didn't buy OVERDRIVER 10, right, as opposed to OVERDRIVER 8, because I already had Viper 8, right? Well, I also already had Graviton 10, and I already had it duplicated. And first off, buying and duplicating OVERDRIVER 10 would cost a lot more. I don't have the acorns to rank it up. I don't have the blueprints to rank it up, so I really couldn't. But second off, I think the 8s are a better comparison between, like, OVERDRIVER and Viper specifically, right? But then, like, what I was saying with OVERDRIVER versus Viper versus minigun, for example, right? So, like, minigun I think is slightly better, but at the same time, like, if you already have Viper, it's slightly worse than OVERDRIVER, and you could probably skip OVERDRIVER, to be honest. But let's say you don't have Viper, but you do have minigun. I think minigun is a better weapon overall, but a lot of people got them at rank 3. Same thing with the 10s. They got them at low rank from those crate rush events that happened. That, you know, it's a good deal, right? I got the 10 for free, I'm pretty sure, and then the 8s was pretty cheap for credits, like 500,000 credits. And that's not bad. I'm glad that I got it, but realistically, it's a low rank and I'd have to rank it up multiple times, and it's just really expensive to do that, so at that point, you may as well just buy the 8s with credits and not spend any acorns on them. In terms of OVERDRIVER, it's kind of the same deal, right? Like, if between minigun 10 and OVERDRIVER 10, just go with OVERDRIVER. It's cheaper and it's basically just as good. My personal preference is that minigun is better than OVERDRIVER. I think they're relatively interchangeable, though. For the most part, they're relatively interchangeable. But then when it comes to, like, Graviton Beam, for example, OVERDRIVER's better than Graviton Beam, for sure, right? But I already have Graviton 10, and like I was mentioning with the range thing, OVERDRIVER does not do great at range, especially against faster targets. I think it's really not even a matter of skill, it's just a matter of it's not really possible to predict fast mechs movements that much, and so you end up just missing a lot of shots. Something like Graviton Beam is a lot better at that kind of range, like 80, 90, even 100 meters, right? Graviton Beam is going to be much better. Panther is a long-range mech. You do not want to get up close with it, so using a weapon that doesn't work very well at long range is probably not a good idea. So for my Panther specifically, I think Graviton's better. But then, you know, does that mean I recommend get a Graviton Beam? No. I would say if you don't have either, get OVERDRIVER because it's an overall better weapon. But if you already have Graviton Beam, you can chill with the OVERDRIVER at least for a while until you decide that you want to use it on, like, I don't know, let's say Eclipse or something, right? So yeah, that's just all of like the general weapon choices out of the way for all the different reasons that you may or may not want to get Overdriver as opposed to these other weapons. Tuvi, excuse me? I can't say that on YouTube. So moving on to talk about the implants specifically, worth mentioning. First off, I'm working on like a full-on implant guide video. So people who ask me about like, oh, what's the best implants for XYZ, I'm probably not going to answer because I'm in the process of making a video on that topic, which might take a little while, but yeah, it'll happen soon enough. But talking about this weapon specifically, I think it's worth mentioning that the damage implant is only comes in the legendary variant. So the only damage implant that exists is the legendary one. So even though that would be the best implant, as is the case with most weapons, you know, don't go sitting around waiting for a rare or an epic damage implant because it just doesn't exist. You're not going to find one. So you're mostly at that point, you're mostly working with the cooling and the burnout. And so the first thing I should do in regard to that is to explain what they do, right? Cooling and burnout roughly translate to reload and mag size. The cooling is essentially a reload implant, and the burnout is essentially a mag size implant. Now, there's a few little caveats to that, but going with that general idea, in general, reload implants are better and mag size implants are worse. But in the case of Overdriver specifically, you not only want to keep your, like I was mentioning before, you want to keep your burn at above 50%, because that means you're dealing more damage. That's the way the weapon works. So if you keep your burn at 50% or higher, then you're dealing more damage. And that means if your mag size is larger, it's easier to keep your weapon within that threshold. So that's actually really nice for you. In terms of the cooling, it actually does not affect your reload speed. It only affects the rate that your weapons cool down. Like when you fully burn out the weapon and you have to wait like 4 seconds or whatever it is, a cooling implant is not going to reduce that. So even though on most weapons, reload type implants are better, on this weapon, it's not, because it kind of doesn't work the same way. So the burnout is going to be the better one for that reason. But both of them are still good. It's kind of similar to minigun, where it's like all 3 weapon implants are ideal to use, but it is a little less implant heavy in the sense that minigun is, you pretty much have to use all 3 weapon implants. But for this weapon, you can use just the damage and burnout and you'll be fine. So 2 other things that I do want to mention. First off, we looked at the modifiers earlier. I told you there was a cooldown modifier. There's also a 50% damage modifier for Viper 8. So if you have Viper and Overdriver, or if you're just using Viper and you're thinking like, wow, this thing seems to be doing way better than Overdriver, you know, why would you say Overdriver is better? It's probably because of this. So yeah, Viper's going to seem a lot better than it actually is, at least for a while. It's going on for like a week. And I would have put this video off, but it's just way too long to wait for, so I'm not going to bother. The other thing I want to mention is in terms of the numbers themselves, for people who are a little bit more statistically inclined, one thing that's an important note to make is that this damage per shot is not the base damage per shot. The way that the weapon works deals more damage the longer it shoots. So essentially, like I mentioned earlier, you start at some base damage number and you slowly build up that damage up to a maximum of 50%. When your burnout percentage reaches 50%, that's when you're dealing maximum damage. And that is why you should keep your burnout percent between 50 and 100 at all times, right? Anything above 50%, you're dealing the maximum amount of damage per shot. This number right here is the average damage per shot. So your base damage is actually 80% of this, and your maximum damage per shot is actually 120% of this. 1283 times 0.8, this is your base damage, and then 1283 times 1.2, this is the maximum damage per shot. So that's an important distinction. Another important distinction is, of course, the fact that they messed up the fire rate a long time ago. These RPM numbers are not accurate. This is the average rounds that you'll fire, including reload time. The actual fire rate is 600 RPM, which means that you're firing 10 shots per second. That's the same fire rate as a minigun or most assault weapons, really. Most assault weapons have an actual RPM of 600, which is 10 shots per second. The projectile speed 200, compared to like minigun, your projectile speed's 320, so it's over 50% faster. Your projectiles travel over 50% 50% faster with something like a minigun, so it's just a lot easier to hit targets at range. And yeah, that projectile speed sort of doesn't really do you any favors at like really high ranges. That's why I don't really want it on Panther. But otherwise, you'd really use it on just anything that's like sustained type damage. So yeah, that's about all there is to kind of say about it. Good weapon. Overdriver is a good weapon. It's an S tier weapon. But again, like I mentioned, there's some caveats to like, you know, how is it worth getting if you already have Graviton? Is it worth getting if you already have Viper, etc., etc. And, you know, at the end of the day, I don't think that it's worth spending 800,000 credits on a weapon that's only mildly better than what you already have. Like, if you have Viper and you're thinking of getting Overdriver, that's a lot of credits to spend on something that's only a small bit better. So, you know, keep that in mind. There's definitely a time and place for it. I think any free-to-play player should probably get, especially the Overdriver 10s, at some point. But in terms of like whether or not it's a priority, kind of depends on what you're looking for. You know, you shouldn't like triple down on these kind of sustained fire weapons. These are usually kind of dangerous because they require line of sight, and even on something like an Aegis, you're kind of putting yourself at risk. If you do want to get these, I would make sure that you first make sure that you get like pod gun, railgun, especially if you're using Orion. Railgun Orion is disgusting, and I promise you will not be disappointed. You know, you want to make sure that you have revokers, you want to make sure you have storm racks, you want to make sure you kind of cover all your bases first before, you know, like doubling down on an assault type weapon like that. But otherwise, yeah, I realized that I made this video kind of late. That's because I didn't have the credits for the longest time. And a lot of you guys probably already got it, or maybe you got it like just now. So yeah, if that's the case, if you have it, then let me know what you're using it on. Otherwise, that will be it for me. Appreciate y'all. Take care.